In the previous video we talked about using partials to help us separate out our code to make it easier to read and to make sense of. In this video we're going to build on this and take a look at another time-saving feature called Mixins. If you're familiar with CSS, you'll know that when a new feature is added to CSS, different web browser vendors implement the new features at different times. And you'll no doubt have seen the vendor prefixes such as WebKit, Moz and MS. These are prefixes added to features which the vendor hasn't finalised implementation of, so essentially beta versions of these facilities, before the vendor eventually drops their vendor prefix and uses the unprefixed version. When you're writing CSS, however, you want to take advantage of all of the features across all possible browsers, and so you, as the person writing the style sheet, need to manually add all of these vendor prefixes in, which is a lot of unnecessary typing. Sass has a solution to this problem, however, which is Mixins. Mixins are almost like standalone functions in the sense that you pass it a parameter, and it will return a style with the parameter properly inserted, and these can be useful to automate the process of adding vendor prefixes for you, so let's take a look at how to use them. So first off, let's create a new partial called _border-radius.scss, which you will know how to do from our previous video. We're going to create our mixin within this file, because we want to try to keep our code nice and clean and easy to work with. We're going to open the file and type @mixin border-radius and then in parentheses $radius. We're then going to have an opening and closing curly brace. This is like creating a function within JavaScript called border radius, which takes a parameter of radius. You can of course call this anything you want to, but seeing as the mixin is going to be specifically used for the border radius, it makes sense to call it that. Inside of the curly braces we're going to need to add in the code we want to return. So in this case we're going to add in a border radius and use the variable radius as the value. Because we don't want to manually type the vendor prefixes anymore, we're going to copy this line and add in the vendor prefixes manually. If you haven't worked with vendor prefixes before, it's important that all of the prefix properties are all before the one version which has no prefix. This is because if a browser suddenly supports the unprefixed version of the property, we want to use this version instead of continuing to use the beta version. So now that we've created our mixin, to use it we need to open up our button style. We can simply import the partial style, but because we're using a mixin this time, and not just a normal partial, we can add the radius value to it, which will import the CSS file and add in the value all in one line. So we've talked about using mixins to help with vendor specific prefixes here, but mixins can be used for anything you want. If you wanted to, you could even transform the entire button into a mixin. You wouldn't gain anything in terms of performance from it, and you would probably make your code more difficult to read, but you can technically do it. There is however one problem you might encounter when using mixins, which is that you might not want to specify all of the values every time you want to use the mixin. After all, with partials you can specify values and just import that. Fortunately, there is a way to specify default values when you're using a mixin, which we'll take a look at now. So imagine that most of the time you want to use a border radius, you want it to have a radius of 8 pixels. To make this our default value, and also allow us the ability to change it using the normal mixin pattern, we can assign a value to the radius variable inside of the mixin. But because we don't want to overwrite values which have been passed across, we also need to add in an exclamation point default to the end of it. This will allow you to provide a value if you want, and if you include it, that's what will be included in the output. But if you don't provide a value, it will set the default value based on what you provide on this line. By using default values, your mixin can now function in the exact same way as a partial would if you wanted to, but also in exactly the same way as a mixin when you want to customize it. And in the next video we're going to be taking a look at some of the other object-oriented programming influences on Sass.